top photographers. He travels the world. But apart from photography, one of his great passions is football. So when he was chosen last year to be Fellow of the National Museum of Photography in Bradford and invited to do a project culminating in a special exhibition, he combined the two loves. The result was a year in the life of Bradford City Football Club. Eamonn is no stranger to the touchline. As a national press photographer, he's covered thousands of sports events. He's won the Sports Photographer of the Year title no less than 4 times. And his coverage of the Heysel Stadium riots also won him the coveted News Photographer of the Year award. But his year following the fortunes of Bradford City, the officials, the players, and of course the fans, was to be something very different.
Having photographed football at the top level for 15 years, the newspapers, and always having to rush back with the goal or the penalty incidents or whatever, I thought it'd be really nice for myself to get behind the scenes and actually take the pictures I'd always dreamt of being able to take. I used to do sport very much in 1 or 2 pictures, and my style was very much behind the scenes to actually show what the atmosphere in the dressing room is like, what the tunnels are like. And what I wanted to do, rather than just do 1 picture or 2 pictures, I wanted to do 40 or 50. I wasn't too sure when I started whether I was going to have a lot of football pictures in it and behind the scenes. But the longer I work on it, I feel that it shouldn't have any football in at all and just be, if you like, the camera looking the other way. Oh, here they come, see them go. I've worked in 2 ways. I did have a shopping list of ideas, if you like. I did say I wanted a boardroom meeting, who washes the shirts, that kind of thing. But as a photojournalist, I've worked very much in a way of going to the stadium or the training ground or the station where the fans arrive and just actually shoot it as things happen. I've never really added up the negatives, but if you work out that in terms of games, I've done about 20 games, shooting 5 or 6 rolls a game, 36 on each picture, so that's quite a lot of film.
Even though the project spanned a year, Eamonn still faced the inevitable deadline. And when the final photograph was taken in February this year, he had some 3,000 pictures. The task then was to select the 40 or so which would go into the exhibition.
It'll be my own edit. It's for, as I say, it's for me. It's not for somebody else. These are my pictures, and the show's got to stand up by my own eye. The thing what I've tried to do is not to bombard the viewer, because people's tolerance level of photographs, I don't think is much more than about 40 or 50, especially in a busy gallery like this where you've got other things on show. I made a decision, first of all, to shoot in black and white rather than colour. I think colour gets in the way. You see the colour before you see the tension. And the second one was not to do a peak of the action type of show, because I felt that you see these sort of pictures every day in the national press and in the local press. And what I'm hoping is that people can come here. If they're interested in football, they'll get enough football in it. But if they're photography fans first, they won't be put off by the fact that it's of a football club. This is a photography exhibition on a football club, rather than just a fanzine sort of exhibition where it's the goals and managers and whatever. This should have an enjoyment for people who just want to come and see some hopefully good photography.
And in February this year, all the theories were put to the test at a reception to mark the opening of the exhibition. And the verdict?
I think the photographs are very good. They capture all sorts of images, aggression, and teamwork and things like this, which I found interesting. And the participation too of the public, I thought was there. The faces of the people watching, their excitement.
I'm not a football supporter, never been to a match in Britain in my life. No intention of going. but I'm interested in photographs. I like the being very black and very white, lack of grain in many of them, and spontaneous. Have I summed it up?
I think you've got kind of patriotism for your own team, and every time Bradford City are on, whether you support them or not, you feel they belong. They're yours, they're your city. They're just an extension of you, really. And therefore, I think anyone who lives and works in Bradford will support and be delighted with the exhibition.
The hardest thing for me was to actually ignore the football. Obviously, being a bit of a footballer myself and loving photographing football, to actually be here and turn the camera the other way was a discipline that I had to learn. The first 3 games, I was getting sucked in. I was finding myself, I better get this penalty, I better get this goal. But in fact, I didn't, I thought, well, we see that every Saturday morning. The TV do it very well on the big games. And I didn't feel I needed those pictures. And once I got over that, once I sort of disciplined myself, I remember one game here, I was shooting the Ipswich game, which was quite a big game for promotion last year. I turned the camera and just watched the father and 2 or 3 kids in the family. And they couldn't understand for the first 5 minutes why I wasn't doing the goals and the saves. But in fact, that's one of the best pictures in the show. But it took me half a game to get it right. All 5 of these people are actually doing something different, from the sort of uncle figure to the 2 kids and whatever. There's a nervous tension even in his face, and then the kids are obviously yelling here, and this one very nervous. And this one here is the again against Ipswich, which is a big game, and the amount of fans here actually framed this one guy, and he looks very strangely concentrating on something different. Obviously he's watching the game, but all the others look as though they're watching another game. And I particularly like all the out of focus faces in the foreground. It's difficult to say why now, after what, 4 or 5 months, but in terms of, he just drew me in. Maybe it's just the way he was not a part of a group, he was very much an individual. I think that picture shows what it's like to be on a cop with maybe 5,000 or 6,000 people and yet just still be yourself. Another theme I had was to do a day in the life of the team travelling, and I chose Sheffield United and actually got on the coach with them and travelled down to Sheffield. The coach is a very luxurious coach, and they have space in which to spread out, and down here lower you can see the tables they traditionally play cards on. Probably on the way back they would have had a game of cards. This picture here of players before the game shows what players get up to before the game, how they kill time. They do actually watch terrible videos and read copies of tabloid newspapers, and I thought that would be an interesting thing for fans to see. And the fact that some of them wear suits and actually get dressed up to go to the game, which I felt was very important to show. And you can see in this picture here before the game, there's three of them out there reading the programme notes, probably looking for pictures of themselves and whatever, and they've got this uniform on, a separate uniform to the one they wear on the pitch. What I felt was these cans that arrived carrying the kit almost looks like a religious ceremony, the way people are all looking at it. And really all that's in there is a couple of sets of boots and some shirts. But the way these fans are looking at it almost looks like an icon. And then my favourite picture probably of the whole year was this one of Stuart McCall leading the team out at Aston Villa. I particularly liked it because the stairs at Villa enabled me to take a picture where all the players were backed up. And a lot of the grounds are very small and difficult to get an idea of several players in the team. But here you could, even though they're in shadow, you can tell there's 7 or 8 people coming down the stairs. And I like the tension on Stuart McCall's face and on the goalkeeper's face. And the fact they're, at this point, they've got used to me being around and they're not looking at me, and they're not joking with me, they're actually looking onto the pitch and wondering, what's going to happen to them today. And there's a 36,000 crowd out there yelling for them, and it's obviously quite tense, and I think this picture reflects that. I knew I had the tension right, and I knew I had the balance of the picture right. What I needed was Stuart McCall's eyes to be open on the frame. If they were open, then that was going to be all right. Things like that, somebody blinks, you can't really tell whether you've got a blink or whether you've got their eyes open. But as soon as I saw his eyes, when I saw it as a wet negative, I knew that was the shot I wanted. I needed one picture to say, what are we going to face? And I think that's the one. Best one I got of the year.
It was the last but one game, and we needed to get a good result down at Villa Park, and I think we'd have gone on to perhaps get promotion that season. And you can see in Stuart's face the anticipation, the waiting to go out, because there were a big crowd there. There was 36,000, I think, and we just let ourselves down that day. And everybody was waiting for so much to happen. When I first came to the exhibition, I expected to see a lot more action pictures, but it does sum up what goes on behind the scenes at the football club during a season like this.
Along here, we get dressing room shots. Now, were you very conscious of the fact that you'd got Eamonn in the dressing room throughout the season with you?
No, I looked at quite a few of these pictures and I never even realised he was in the changing room at the time. But some of the pictures he's taken do sum up what the people on the terraces and the supporters don't see, the knocks you're getting during games and the stitches, and I mean there's a strapping going on Futcher there. I mean people don't see things like that.
Yes. Yeah. So I wanted to be a fly on the wall. I didn't want them reacting, oh here's Eamonn with his camera, you know, I'll put my arm around each other and sort of mess around and trying to and yeah, I needed to win their confidence to say, well, I'm not in their way and I don't want to take the mick out of them or whatever. You know, I was trying to do a genuine thing. There must have been times in dressing rooms when they thought, you know, what's this guy wandering around with his camera with just, I mean, they just had underpants on or towels wrapped around and they thought, what's all this up? But in fact, I think it was to try and show the way of life, you know, what it's actually like being a professional player in the second division. I remember Mick Kennedy on the first coach trip was telling me, you know, he was actually leaning over his shoulder taking a picture of him reading, and if he said, you know, if you take another picture of me, I'll shove that camera up your backside. But in the end, he became a great friend and somebody that I got on very well with.
How cooperative were the club in all this?
They're very good. I had access to boardroom meetings, to the dressing room, to the training ground, everything really. There was times when I knew it wasn't right to knock on a door and go through, and maybe another photographer would have pushed his way through. But there's times when they lose an important game, and obviously I wanted those pictures that were behind the door, but I felt I might have got a sort of thump on the nose, and if not literally, sort of verbally, you know.
Of course, the players have taken quite a bit of interest in it now, I think.
That's right. They seem to have gone around and enjoyed it. I was worried about the fact that there's no pictures of their goals or their headers and whatever. And I think maybe the first time they went around, they probably said, well, you know, where's that great goal I scored against Sheffield United or whatever. But as I said to you earlier, that's something I try to avoid doing.
Ironically, despite his determination to keep the camera away from the action on the pitch, last year produced one game where events and emotions on the field were to produce some of the most memorable photographs in the entire exhibition. In May, Stuart McCall led the Bradford team out at Ayresome Park in Middlesbrough for the second leg of the promotion playoffs. Victory in that match would mean First Division football at Valley Parade.
I thought I had a real story in my hands. To be fair, I wanted to just do a story of an average second division club and what's life like on the road and average gates and playing bottom of table teams and whatever. But to actually almost get to the First Division was very exciting.
But for the Bradford players and supporters, that excitement was to be short-lived.
Senior used his height well there, and a slip, and Ripley inside the area. Tomlinson, Slaven's there. Bernie Slaven scores for Middlesbrough.
This is the end of full time up at Middlesbrough, and the players are all getting together, and the fullback there is looking very gaunt, and his eyes are showing so much tension and tiredness. I really felt that that picture was showing the feeling that they, you know, were up against it.
And in extra time, Bradford's hopes of First Division football finally disappeared.
Cooper's cross. Oh, and Sinnott's missed it. There's a real chance here for Hamilton.
And that one goal was to destroy a whole season's work for Bradford City.
And the referee blows the whistle. It's Middlesbrough's night. It's Middlesbrough 2, Bradford City 0. Bernie Slaven, head in hands, can hardly believe it. The fans are on the pitch. It's a glory night here on Teesside, and a night of misery for Bradford City. It's a cruel way, perhaps, for a season to disappear down the drain for Bradford. Terry Dolan tries to console his team, but it must be hard at this moment to find the right words.
John Hendry here is in tears and clapping the fans, and the two at the end there who are actually saying thanks for coming, but we couldn't do it for you on the night. And that player Greg Abbott there is almost in tears. You can tell by, you don't have to see the tears, you can actually tell by the body language that he's had a bad night.
We'd played, I don't know, 46 games that season, and it all came down to 2 games, and them 90 minutes there summed the season up for us, you know. That's probably the lowest I've been since I've been at Bradford City, actually. At the end of that game, I felt like crying. I don't feel like crying at the end of many games.
The highs and the lows really were in the 2 games against Middlesbrough, so near to the First Division, and yet the disappointment of missing out. And obviously the expectation of travelling to Middlesbrough with a reasonable result at Bradford, but then actually seeing those players crying near the end of at the end of the game was the lowest point. And careers have just changed on that one game. Players have moved on, managers have been sacked. Just the whole change in personnel over the years has been staggering for me to witness. I've read about transfers in other teams, but never actually realised that 5 or 6 people go out of the team, and it's quite a lot of players to see go, and a manager as well. But I hadn't actually realised it in such that the character goes, but the heart stays. And then a little bit of glory in the FA Cup this year, when Bradford beat Spurs. These 2 pictures, one of the crowd celebrating the goal, and then one of the team at the end of the game, where they're all obviously very delighted to have won. I was lucky enough to get 2 or 3 players together, and sort of, it was my only set-up picture really of the whole year, was to actually say, come on, let's all get together and make a bit of a picture. And then all the other players came in. And the irony was, all the other newspapers gathered around and got in my way a bit, and I was having to sort of battle against elbows and arms to get the picture that I wanted. But this probably says in one picture the sort of high of the season. If the Middlesbrough says the lows, then this is certainly the high of the season.
I don't get very emotional usually after the game, but the result was so good for us because we were going through a bad time of the period, like, you know, and we got the result, and I went running to the crowd and started jumping up and down like a 10-year-old, and then everybody just circled in the pitch and got a picture, and I happened to be in the middle with my arm.
When you see the picture processed, it's a question of how many faces are looking at the camera, how many eyes are open. We've just lost Mick Kennedy's eyes there, and this fullback here has got his head down. But given that you're photographing 12 or 13 players, to actually get so many looking at the camera, or so many faces that you can see, and obviously the joys on a lot of their faces, and to see all the players together seemed a very significant shot for an exhibition, especially when you've got young fans coming to see the pictures. And as I haven't done much football action, this really was my sort of tribute to a good game, and the fact that the players have done very well.
It was a happy night, yeah. We got a great result that night, and I think the picture shows all the emotion that we felt at the end of the game.
Yeah. Some people may be surprised I've got a picture here of some youngsters. This is actually the Bingley youth team who'd won the local trophy for their league, and I saw them gathering just before they were going to run around the pitch in a sort of lap of honour. And what I liked was the way they all just grouped together, not in a formal sense of a team, but sort of all higgledy-piggledy, and they're all involved in looking at each other or looking out on the pitch, or this young lad's putting his sock up, and this guy at the back, the old steward, who's the bane of all our lives when we're photographers. It's just a nice collection of people. As I say, in terms of my brief with the club was to do the whole club, and I feel that the youth team is obviously a vital part of that. This picture here is of Brian Mitchell, who was concussed early in the game against Plymouth, and I was lucky enough to sort of charge around to the dugout where he was being tested for concussion, and I like this finger here which is checking out whether he can go on or not, and you can see from his eyes, already his eye's been split just below the eye there, and a lot of tension in that, and again his gesture, as I was saying about that earlier photograph. I like lots of gestures in pictures, and particularly pleasing one. Another one, this one here is of the Chelsea game, and it's the Bradford fans. I was very keen to see what a game would look like from the back of the terrace, looking down on the fans, particularly when they've scored a goal or doing well. And this is a very familiar gesture now in football, baiting the other team's fans, and it's all the hands, just this one finger gesture which makes the photograph. You follow your nose a little bit, even though you maybe don't want to be a sports photographer on it. Obviously it would be daft not to be at the Middlesbrough game or the big games against Ipswich and Everton and Spurs. You tend to follow the storyline, but I haven't got the goals against Spurs or the goals against Ipswich, it's not like that, but I needed the bigness of those games to make the stands to be packed, and a couple of times I worked at the back of the cop-up there, and I couldn't have done that in, so we say, in a reserve game or in a game against end-of-season game, which is probably happening this week. They'll probably be half empty.
Eamonn's original intention was to end the year after the FA Cup glory, but in February he was back amidst rumours of a change at the top.
This is the secretary and Jack Tordoff, the chairman, and it's about all the sort of debating whether they should maybe sack Terry Dolan or bring in another manager. And I felt that was a scene that people wouldn't normally see. They wouldn't maybe realise that the meetings actually take place in the secretary's office, which is nothing very special. It's not a great grand boardroom with a long table and special lights or whatever. It's although they do have that in the club, but they like to meet in a cosier room, and they have these meetings every other Monday.
And when the decision was made, Terry Dolan was sacked, and back to Valley Parade came an old favourite, Terry Yorath, an irresistible target for Eamonn and his camera.
But I couldn't resist coming back and doing Terry Yorath. He was such a lively character, as a photographer's dream, and even from these pictures here where he's just watching the game, you can see that he's a manager who's on his toes all the time and sort of yelling and likes to get very close to the action. And the final picture in the show is where Terry Yorath is acclaiming a penalty. It's not even a goal, it's sort of the great joy of even getting a penalty. Unfortunately, the penalty was missed, but I'm sure this year Terry Yorath will lift the team up the table, and hopefully they'll be knocking on the door of the First Division again soon. I think it's pretty good. It's not perfect. It never was going to be ideal, because even walking around this morning I've seen a couple of pictures that I was craving for last year, and it's just the way things go. But because it is shall we say, it has a permanent time, i.e. a beginning and an end, you just have to say, well, that's what I did within that year, and put it on a wall. I think I've got 5 or 6 pretty good pictures. If I could have done it over 10 years, I would hope there'd be 5 or 6 great pictures. And so there's a few pictures in there that I wouldn't call classic photographs, but if you put them all together, they should tell a good story. I actually feel quite sad. It's quite sad actually looking around here now and actually remembering those memories and the personalities involved, and to actually let go of a big project like that, it has become, it's a bit like leaving school.